Get on your knees before we make the whole yard watch you bleed.
Victor Hale stepped close enough for Marcus Reed to feel his breath.
First day in here, new guy learns fast. You don't walk this yard unless somebody owns you.
Marcus didn't move. Hale shoved 2 fingers into Marcus's chest.
Look at you. Quiet, stiff, acting like that calm face means something.
His men closed the circle near the fence.
You hear me talking to you?
Hale snapped.
Or are you too proud to answer before I break that pride out of you?
Marcus looked once toward the guards. They looked away.
You don't want to do this,
Marcus said. Hale laughed and raised his fist.
Show 'em how it works in here.
Nobody in that yard knew the man they had cornered had spent 20 years in Delta Force ending fights before they even started. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Marcus Reed stepped through the steel doors of Blackwater Ridge Penitentiary. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on his disciplined frame. His wrists stayed cuffed behind his back. The intake corridor stretched ahead like a concrete tunnel lined with rage. The sound hit him first. Steel doors slamming. Voices shouting from every tier. Inmates pressed against cell bars, watching the new arrival with hungry eyes. Some banged metal cups against the bars. Others screamed threats and promises. The noise echoed off concrete walls until it became one roaring beast. Marcus walked straight ahead. He didn't look up at the catcalls, didn't flinch when someone spit through the bars. His military training kept his face blank. But his eyes recorded everything. Exit routes, guard positions, weak points in the structure. Officer Travis Boone walked beside him with a twisted smile. The man enjoyed this parade. Boone was thick around the middle with arms like tree trunks. His uniform stretched tight across his gut. A badge gleamed on his chest like a weapon. "Welcome to paradise, soldier boy," Boone said. His voice cut through the noise. "Hope you like your new home. You're gonna be here a long time." Marcus said nothing. Words were ammunition. He wouldn't waste them on a man like Boone. They reached the processing desk. The clerk waited with paperwork spread across dirty metal. But Boone held up one hand. "Hold on there, Jimmy," Boone said. His eyes never left Marcus. "Let's take our time with this one. Make sure everything's proper." The clerk looked confused. Processing usually took 15 minutes. But Boone leaned against the desk and checked his watch. "Recreation yard's about to open," Boone said. "Wouldn't want our new friend to miss the welcome party." Through the barred windows, Marcus watched inmates filing into the main yard. Groups formed quickly. White men clustered near the weight benches. Black inmates gathered by the basketball court. Latinos claimed the picnic tables. Everyone stayed in their territory. Everyone watched everyone else. High above the yard, a figure stood in the control tower. Warden Douglas Shaw pressed his hands against the glass. Even from this distance, Marcus felt the man stare. Shaw wore a pressed suit and polished shoes. He looked more like a businessman than a prison warden, but his eyes held something cold and calculating. Shaw lifted a radio to his mouth. His lips moved. Boone's radio crackled to life. "Let the yard welcome him," Shaw's voice came through the static. Boone grinned like a shark. "You heard the boss. Time for your grand entrance." The processing could wait. Boone grabbed Marcus by the arm and steered him toward the yard entrance. The cuffs came off with a sharp click. Blood rushed back into Marcus's wrists. He flexed his fingers once, muscle memory from 1,000 training exercises. The yard doors opened with a heavy clang. Afternoon sunlight hit Marcus's face. The rec yard spread out before him like an arena. Concrete stretched between high walls topped with razor wire. Guard towers loomed at every corner. Armed men watched from behind bulletproof glass. But it was the inmates that made Marcus's instincts flare. Conversations stopped. Weights clanked to the ground. Every eye turned toward the entrance. The yard fell silent, except for the wind through the wire. Marcus stepped onto the concrete. Behind him, Boone and two other guards spread out. They positioned themselves just close enough to claim they were watching, just far enough to avoid getting involved if things went bad. Near the far fence, a massive figure pushed away from a group of white inmates. Victor Hale stood 6'4" with shoulders that could break through walls. Prison tattoos covered his thick arms like war paint. Scars crisscrossed his knuckles. His eyes held the kind of violence that came from years behind bars. 10 men followed Hale across the yard. They moved with purpose. Predators who had found fresh meat. Hale planted himself directly in Marcus's path. The other inmates formed a half circle, blocking any escape route toward the buildings. Their backs faced the fence. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. The yard held its breath. "Well, well," Hale said. His voice carried across the concrete. "Look what the guards dragged in." Hale crossed his arms over his massive chest. The muscles bulged under his prison shirt. A crude tattoo of a skull grinned from his forearm. His smile held no warmth, only the promise of pain. "First day rule around here, boy," Hale continued. "You either belong to somebody, or you get buried by everybody. And looking at you," he let his eyes travel up and down Marcus's frame, "I'm thinking you're gonna look real pretty on your knees." The other inmates pressed closer. Their faces showed excitement mixed with bloodlust. They had seen this show before. New fish gets broken. Old fish stays on top. That was the natural order. Marcus stood perfectly still. His breathing stayed calm and controlled, but his eyes never stopped moving, measuring distances, calculating angles, reading the terrain like a battlefield. "Ain't got nothing to say?" Hale stepped forward until their faces were inches apart. "That's all right. You'll learn to speak up soon enough." Hale raised one massive hand and placed it on Marcus's shoulder. The grip was meant to be threatening, a show of dominance for the watching crowd. "Here's how this works," Hale said. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every ear in the yard. "You kneel down right here in front of everybody. Show respect. Then maybe we let you live through your first week." The circle of inmates pressed tighter. Some cracked their knuckles. Others shifted their weight like fighters ready to pounce. The guards stayed back, pretending to watch the basketball court. Hale's grip tightened on Marcus's shoulder. "I said kneel, boy. Don't make me ask twice." Marcus looked up at the control tower. Warden Shaw still stood at the window, radio in hand. This was planned, orchestrated, a welcome party designed to break him before he could cause problems. "Last chance," Hale said. His voice turned deadly. "Kneel down and kiss the concrete, or we put you down permanent." Marcus felt the shove before he saw it coming. Hale's massive palm struck his chest like a sledgehammer, sending him stumbling backward 3 steps. The concrete scraped under his prison shoes as he fought to keep his balance. "There we go," Hale said with satisfaction. "Now you're learning how gravity works around here." The gang erupted in laughter. Cruel sounds that echoed off the prison walls like hyenas circling wounded prey. They pressed closer, forming a tighter circle around Marcus near the chain-link fence. "First-day inmates got 2 choices," Hale continued, rolling his shoulders like a boxer warming up. "They submit real nice and quiet, or they bleed real loud and messy." He cracked his knuckles one by one. "Which one you picking, boy?" Marcus kept his hands down at his sides. No fists, no fighting stance. Nothing that would give the watching guards an excuse to claim he started the violence. His voice came out calm and level. "Walk away." The words hung in the air for a moment. Then the laughter started again, even louder this time. "Walk away," Hale repeated, his face twisting with disbelief. Did this fool just tell me to walk away? One of the gang members, a skinny man with teardrop tattoos under his eyes, slapped his knee. This boy thinks he's still on the outside, thinks he can just ask real nice and we'll leave him alone. Maybe he's one of them soft types, said another inmate. This one built like a linebacker with arms covered in prison ink. You know, the kind that cries for his mama when the lights go out. Hale studied Marcus's face, searching for fear, for the trembling that always came right before a man broke. But Marcus's expression remained stone steady. His breathing stayed controlled. That seemed to anger Hale even more. You think you're tough? Hale asked. You think standing there looking all calm makes you some kind of hard man? Marcus said nothing. He watched Hale's shoulders, the way his weight shifted from foot to foot, the telltale signs of a man about to explode into violence. I've been running this yard for 8 years, Hale continued, his voice rising. 8 years. Ain't nobody ever told me to walk away, not once. The other inmates started making sounds of agreement. Murmurs of, "That's right," and "Show him, Hale," drifted through the group. They were working themselves up, building toward the moment when words turned into fists. You know what I think? Hale stepped closer again, close enough that Marcus could smell the cigarettes on his breath. I think you're just another scared little fish trying to act bigger than he is. And you know what we do to scared little fish? Marcus's eyes never left Hale's face. Walk away. That was when Hale's patience finally snapped. His face turned red with rage. A vein bulged on his forehead. His massive hands clenched into fists the size of hammers. You just made the worst mistake of your pathetic life, Hale snarled. He pulled back his right arm, muscles coiling like springs. Boys, let's teach this fool some respect. The gang pressed forward, ready to unleash hell. Their shadows fell across Marcus like vultures preparing to feast. In the control tower, Warden Shaw leaned closer to the window, anticipating the show. Hale's fist came flying forward with all the force of a man who had spent years crushing skulls and breaking bones. That was when Marcus moved. The transformation happened in the space between heartbeats. 1 second, he stood still as stone. The next second, he became something else entirely. Something built for war. Marcus stepped inside Hale's punch before it could build momentum. His left elbow shot upward like a piston, catching Hale square under the jaw. The crack echoed across the yard like a gunshot. Hale's head snapped back. His eyes rolled white. His massive body crumpled toward the concrete. But Marcus was already moving to the next target. The skinny inmate with teardrop tattoos rushed in from the left, a homemade shiv glinting in his hand. Marcus caught his wrist in mid-swing, twisted hard, and drove his knee up into the man's elbow. The joint bent backward with a wet pop. The shiv clattered away as the inmate screamed. 2 more gang members charged from opposite sides, trying to tackle Marcus to the ground. He grabbed the first one by the shirt, used the man's own momentum to spin him around, and launched him face first into the chain-link fence. The metal rattled like thunder as the inmate bounced off and collapsed. The second attacker tried to wrap his arms around Marcus's waist. Marcus dropped his center of gravity, grabbed the man's wrist, and threw him over his shoulder in a perfect judo toss. The inmate hit the concrete so hard the impact knocked the wind from his lungs. The linebacker with prison tattoos came next, swinging wild haymakers that could have shattered Marcus's skull. Marcus ducked under the first punch, stepped to the side of the second, and drove his fist into the man's solar plexus. The giant folded in half, gasping for air that wouldn't come. More bodies rushed forward. Marcus became a blur of controlled violence. An elbow here, a knee there. Precise strikes that disabled without killing. He moved like water around their attacks, always 1 step ahead, always in the perfect position to counter. One inmate grabbed a broken piece of concrete, raising it high to crush Marcus's skull. Marcus caught the man's wrist, twisted him around, and used his own weight to drive him into the ground. The concrete chunk rolled away harmlessly. Another gang member tried to grab Marcus from behind in a chokehold. Marcus reached back, grabbed the man's shirt, and threw him forward over his own shoulder. The inmate sailed through the air and landed in a groaning heap 10 feet away. The yard had gone completely silent, except for the sounds of bone hitting concrete and men crying out in pain. Even the guards had stopped pretending to look elsewhere. They stared with their mouths hanging open, unable to believe what they were seeing. In less than 30 seconds, all 11 gang members lay scattered across the concrete. Some groaned softly. Others didn't move at all. Hale himself lay face down in a growing puddle of his own blood, his nose clearly broken, his jaw hanging at an unnatural angle. Marcus stood in the center of the carnage, breathing normally. His orange jumpsuit wasn't even wrinkled. Not a single drop of sweat had formed on his forehead. The entire yard stared at him like they had just witnessed the impossible. That was when Officer Boone finally came running with a squad of guards behind him, his face twisted with fury because the new inmate had just ruined what was supposed to be a quick and quiet killing. "Get down on the ground!" Boone screamed, drawing his baton. "Get down right now!" The guards swarmed Marcus from all directions, wrestling his arms behind his back and snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Boone's face was purple with rage as he grabbed Marcus by the back of the neck. "You just made yourself a very dangerous enemy," Boone whispered in Marcus's ear as they dragged him away. But Marcus said nothing. He kept his eyes forward as they pulled him across the yard, past hundreds of inmates who pressed against their cell windows and fence lines, staring at the man who had just changed everything they thought they knew about survival in Blackwater Ridge. Marcus sat in the concrete holding room beneath the administration wing, his hands still cuffed behind his back. The fluorescent light above flickered and buzzed like an angry insect. The air smelled of bleach and fear. Officer Boone slammed his fist on the metal table so hard it echoed through the small space. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he shouted, spit flying from his lips. "You just started a full-scale riot on your first day." Marcus stared straight ahead. His face showed nothing. Boone walked around the table, his boots clicking on the concrete floor. 11 men, Reed. 11. You put them all in the infirmary." He leaned down until his face was inches from Marcus's ear. "That makes you either stupid or dangerous. And stupid men don't fight like that." Marcus remained silent. "Answer me!" Boone screamed, grabbing Marcus's shoulder. "What kind of training did you have before this place?" "Nothing." Marcus might as well have been carved from stone. Boone's face turned red. He wanted to hit Marcus right there, but something in the man's eyes warned him against it. Those were not the eyes of a broken inmate. They were the eyes of someone who had seen real violence and was not afraid of more. 3 floors above them, Warden Shaw sat at his polished desk reading through Marcus Reed's file. The thick folder was stamped with red letters. Classified. Shaw's hands shook slightly as he turned each page. 20 years in Delta Force. Multiple commendations for valor. Specialist in close quarters combat and hostage rescue. Expert marksman. Advanced survival training. The list went on and on, but it was the final entry that made Shaw's blood run cold. Marcus had been court-martialed after exposing corruption in military supply chains. The company named in the reports was Meridian Defense Solutions, the same company that paid Shaw $15,000 a month to use Blackwater Ridge inmates for illegal labor contracts. Shaw picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "We have a problem," he said when the voice answered. "The Reed situation is bigger than we thought." The voice on the other end was calm. "How big?" "He knows about Meridian." He's the one who exposed them before his conviction. And he just took apart Victor Hale's entire crew in 30 seconds. A long pause. Then handle it. Quietly. Shaw hung up and stared out his office window at the prison yard below. Inmates were still talking in small groups about what they had witnessed. Word was spreading fast through the cell blocks. The new guy was not like anyone they had ever seen. Shaw pressed his intercom button. "Boone, bring Reed to cell block C. Put him in Unit 47. Make sure he has plenty of company." Cell block C was where Shaw kept his most useful informants and his most violent inmates. Men who asked no questions when money changed hands. Men who could make problems disappear without leaving fingerprints on the paperwork. Marcus was processed through the system like any other inmate, but the guards handled him differently now. They kept their distance. They watched his hands. They spoke in whispers when they thought he could not hear. The cell they gave him was small and cold. Gray concrete walls. A thin mattress on a steel frame. A metal toilet in the corner. Through the narrow window, he could see the razor wire that topped the prison walls. Other inmates watched him from their cells as he walked down the corridor. Some stared with curiosity. Others with respect. A few with the kind of hate that comes from fear. Marcus sat on his bunk and waited. He knew this was not over. The fight in the yard was just the beginning. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Expensive shoes, not prison boots. Marcus looked up to see Warden Shaw standing outside his cell, dressed in his crisp uniform with polished buttons and a friendly smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Reed," Shaw said quietly, his voice carrying no emotion. "Welcome to Blackwater Ridge." He paused, studying Marcus through the steel bars. "You know, I've been running this facility for 12 years. I've seen every kind of inmate you can imagine. The scared ones, the angry ones, the ones who think they're tough." Shaw stepped closer to the bars. "But you're different, aren't you?" Marcus said nothing. Shaw nodded as if he had expected the silence. "I've read your file, Marcus. All of it. The classified parts, too. Very impressive record. 20 years of service. Multiple deployments. Some very interesting missions that most people will never hear about. Still nothing from Marcus. The thing is," Shaw continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "men with your particular skill set don't usually end up in places like this unless someone wants them here. And men who expose the wrong people." Shaw smiled coldly. "Well, they have a habit of not surviving long enough to tell their stories." Marcus finally looked directly at the warden. Their eyes met through the bars. Shaw's smile faded completely. "You should have died before you got here." The first night in cell block C was never quiet. Marcus lay on the thin mattress, staring at the concrete ceiling while voices drifted through the air vents. Inmates whispered to each other through the metal ducts that connected their cells. Some talked about their cases. Others made deals. A few just needed to hear another human voice in the darkness. "New guys in Polk's old cell," someone whispered. "Poor bastard, don't know what happened there. Should somebody tell him?" "Tell him what? That they killed Ray? Man's got enough problems." Marcus listened without moving. Raymond Polk. The name meant nothing to him, but the tone in their voices said everything. Fear. Anger. The kind of careful respect people showed when talking about the dead. Sleep came in short bursts. Every sound made him alert. Footsteps in the corridor. Keys rattling. Doors opening and closing. In Delta Force, he had learned to rest while staying ready. Prison was no different. When morning came, guards banged on cell doors and ordered inmates to line up for breakfast. Marcus joined the line of orange jumpsuits shuffling toward the mess hall. Men avoided eye contact with him, but he felt their stares. The mess hall was loud and chaotic. Inmates sat at metal tables bolted to the floor. Guards watched from elevated platforms with riot gear visible on their belts. Marcus got his tray, watery eggs, burnt toast, and coffee that looked like dirty water. He found an empty spot at the end of a table and ate in silence. "Mind if I sit?" Marcus looked up to see an older man with gray hair and intelligent eyes, Hispanic, maybe 65, wearing glasses held together with tape. He moved carefully, like someone who had learned to avoid trouble. "Luis Ortega," the man said quietly, sitting across from Marcus. "Been here 8 years. Financial crimes. Nothing violent." He stirred his eggs without eating them. "You're in Raymond Polk's old cell." Marcus kept eating, but he listened. Ray was preparing to testify. Luis continued in a whisper. "Federal case about prison labor transfers. About inmates who got moved to work details and never came back." Luis glanced around the mess hall, making sure no guards were close. "They found him hanging from his bedsheet 3 days ago. Same morning you arrived?" Luis pushed his tray away. "Funny timing, don't you think?" Marcus finished his coffee and stood to leave. "Check under your bunk," Luis said without looking at him. Ray was smart. He hid things where smart men hide things. Back in his cell, Marcus waited for the guards to finish their count. Then he knelt beside his bunk and ran his fingers along the concrete wall. Nothing unusual at first, just cold stone and metal joints. Then he found them. Scratched dates under the steel frame. Barely visible unless you knew to look. The dates went back months. Someone had been keeping track of something. Marcus examined the wall more carefully. Near the air vent, he spotted a faint smear. Dark brown. Old blood, maybe. Or something else. The vent itself was standard prison construction. Metal grating bolted to the wall. But one of the screws looked different. Newer. Like it had been removed and replaced. Marcus listened for footsteps in the corridor. When he heard nothing, he worked the screw loose with his fingernails. It came out easily. Behind the grating, tucked into a gap between the ductwork and the wall, was a small piece of paper, folded tight and wrapped in plastic torn from a commissary bag. Marcus unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat and desperate. "Shaw takes inmates to work details that don't exist. Boone handles transfers. Bodies disappear. Families never get answers. Connected to Meridian Defense Solutions, same company from the military contracts. They're using prison labor for black ops training. Real bullets. Real targets. Real deaths." At the bottom, in different ink, "If something happens to me, find the ledgers in the chaplain's office. 3rd file cabinet, behind the false panel. MR. They know you're coming. They wanted you dead before you could put the pieces together." Marcus stared at the paper. Meridian Defense Solutions. The same contractor he had exposed before his arrest. The same company that had framed him to protect their illegal operations. Raymond Polk had been killed because he discovered the connection. Shaw wanted Marcus dead because he was the one witness who could prove everything. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor, getting closer. Marcus quickly folded the paper and started to return it to its hiding place, but the footsteps stopped directly outside his cell. "Well, well," Officer Boone's voice carried through the steel door. "Looks like our war hero found Ray's little treasure hunt." The lock clicked open. Boone stepped into the cell, his hand resting on his baton. His eyes went straight to the loose vent screw in Marcus's hand. "That's prison property you're tampering with, inmate." Boone smiled coldly. "And whatever you found in there belongs to the state of Colorado." He held out his hand. "Give it to me." "Now." Marcus stood perfectly still, the loose screw cold in his palm. Boone's eyes never left his hands. "I asked you a question, inmate." Boone stepped closer. "What did you find?" 2 more guards appeared behind Boone in the doorway. Their hands rested on their batons. Across the tier, Luis Ortega pressed his face against his cell window, watching. "Nothing," Marcus said quietly. Boone laughed. "Nothing? You just happened to be fixing the vent for us?" He gestured to the other guards. "Search this cell, every inch." The guards moved efficiently, overturning the thin mattress and checking inside the steel toilet. They pulled books from the small shelf and shook them out. One guard examined the scratched dates under the bunk, while another ran his hands along the walls. Marcus kept his breathing steady. Before Boone had entered, he had slipped Polk's note inside the cracked binding of an old Bible left by the previous inmate. The book sat on the shelf with the other prison-issued items, looking untouched. "Check that vent again," Boone ordered. A guard shined a flashlight into the space behind the grating. "Nothing here, sir. Just dust." Boone's face darkened. He stepped close enough that Marcus could smell coffee on his breath. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Boone whispered. "Think that tough guy act in the yard makes you special?" Marcus said nothing. "I got news for you, soldier boy. This ain't Afghanistan. This is my house." Boone grabbed Marcus by the front of his jumpsuit. "And in my house, heroes don't last long." He shoved Marcus against the wall. "Report to the laundry unit tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Let's see how well you handle some real prison work." Boone turned to leave, then stopped at the doorway. "Oh, and Reed, next time you want to play handyman, remember that tampering with prison property gets you a week in the hole. On bread and water." The guards followed Boone out. The cell door slammed shut. Marcus waited until their footsteps faded before retrieving the Bible. The note was still there, pressed between pages of Psalms. He memorized every word again, then returned it to its hiding place. The next morning, Marcus reported to the laundry unit in the basement. Industrial washing machines lined the walls, their metal drums spinning with loads of prison uniforms. The air was thick with steam and the smell of bleach. 3 of Hale's men worked the machines. Their leader, a stocky man named Torres, had his left arm in a sling from the yard fight. When he saw Marcus, his good hand tightened on a laundry cart handle. "Look what we got here," Torres called to the others. "The yard hero wants to do some washing." A young black inmate named Darius was folding uniforms at a table near the back. He looked up nervously when Torres spoke, then quickly returned to his work. "You get the number 4 machine." Torres pointed to a washing unit in the corner, away from the main work area. "And you work alone. No talking to nobody." Marcus nodded and began loading uniforms into the machine. The work was simple, but he noticed how the guards positioned themselves. There were blind spots near the supply closets, corners where cameras couldn't see. Halfway through the morning, Torres and another gang member cornered Darius near the folding station. "You got our money, kid?" Torres asked quietly. Darius shook his head. "I told you, man. I don't have nothing. My family can't send money." "Then you work extra shifts. Shaw's got a new detail that needs bodies." "What kind of detail?" Torres smiled. "The kind that pays better than laundry. But you gotta earn it first." He grabbed Darius by the shirt and shoved him toward the supply closet. Marcus stepped between them. "He's working," Marcus said calmly. Torres looked surprised. "This ain't your business, hero." "It is now." The other gang members moved closer. Marcus could feel their tension, but he also saw their hesitation. Word of the yard fight had spread. "You don't understand how things work here," Torres said. "Kid owes protection money. He don't pay, he gets hurt. Simple math. Protection from what? From us." Marcus stared at Torres until the man looked away. "Darius," Marcus said without turning around. "Get back to work." The young inmate scurried to his folding station. Torres glared but didn't follow. During lunch break, Luis found Marcus in the chow line. "You shouldn't have done that," Luis whispered. "Now they'll target both of you." "Tell me about the work details," Marcus said quietly. Luis glanced around, then moved closer. "Shaw calls it the Restricted Labor Program. Inmates who cause trouble get transferred to a work camp outside the prison. They come back different, broken. The ones who come back at all. How many don't come back? In the last 2 years? Maybe 20 guys. Officially, they're transferred to other facilities. But their families never hear from them again. Marcus absorbed this information. And inmates like Darius? Shaw needs fresh bodies. He uses the gangs to pressure people into volunteering, offers better food, early release promises. Most guys are desperate enough to believe it. What kind of work? Luis shook his head. Nobody talks about that. Too scared. But I heard rumors. Training exercises. Live fire drills. Like they're preparing for something. That evening, Marcus sat on his bunk reading the Bible, thinking about Meridian defense solutions and black ops training with real bullets. Polk had been killed for discovering the connection. Now Marcus was seeing it firsthand. The prison wasn't just corrupt, it was a recruitment center for something much bigger. Shaw's voice echoed through the corridor as he made his rounds, checking cells before lights out. When he reached Marcus's cell, he stopped. "I hear you had an eventful first day in laundry," Shaw said through the bars. "Making friends already." Marcus didn't look up from his book. "Officer Boone tells me you might benefit from a change of scenery. Some outdoor work. Fresh air." Shaw pulled a transfer form from his clipboard and showed it to Marcus. "Restricted labor detail. Starts Monday. Congratulations, Reed. You just volunteer?" The next morning, Marcus walked through the concrete corridors toward the laundry unit. His boots echoed against the walls while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Other inmates shuffled past, keeping their eyes down. Word traveled fast in Blackwater Ridge. Officer Boone waited at the entrance, clipboard in hand, and a cold smile on his face. "Sleep well, Reed?" Boone asked. "Hope you're ready for some honest work." The laundry room hit Marcus like a wall of steam and noise. Industrial washers the size of cars churned loads of prison uniforms. Dryers roared like jet engines. The air was thick and humid, making it hard to breathe. Pipes rattled overhead, and the concrete floor was slick with condensation. Marcus noticed the security cameras immediately. Only 2 were positioned to cover the main work area. Large blind spots existed between the machines, especially near the back wall where supplies were stored. "You'll be working the heavy loads," Boone said, pointing to the largest washers. "Industrial detergent, hot water, lots of lifting. Perfect job for a tough guy like you." Darius Bell was already at his station, folding prison shirts with nervous efficiency. The young man glanced at Marcus, but quickly looked away. 3 other inmates worked the room, all keeping their distance. Boone stationed only 1 guard near the exit door. The man looked bored, reading a magazine instead of watching the workers. Marcus filed that detail away. "I'll check on you boys later," Boone said. "Play nice." 20 minutes into the shift, Marcus felt the change. The other workers started drifting toward the exit. Darius tried to follow them, but Torres stepped into his path. "Where are you going, kid? Work ain't done yet." 2 more of Hale's men emerged from behind the industrial dryers. They moved with purpose, positioning themselves between Marcus and the guard. One carried a twisted wet towel. Another had something sharp hidden in his palm. The remaining guard suddenly found urgent business in the hallway outside. "Time to finish what we started yesterday," Torres said. Marcus stepped away from the washer, keeping his hands visible. "This won't end the way you think it will." "Yeah? You took us by surprise in the yard. This time we came prepared." Torres lunged first, swinging the twisted towel like a whip. The wet fabric cracked against Marcus's shoulder, but he rolled with the impact and grabbed Torres by the wrist. He twisted until Torres dropped the towel, then used his momentum to slam him into the side of a washer. The second attacker came from Marcus's left, jabbing with a sharpened plastic knife. Marcus deflected the blade with his forearm and drove his elbow into the man's ribs. Air rushed out of the attacker's lungs as he doubled over. Darius scrambled behind a laundry cart, trying to get out of the way. The third gang member cornered him there, grabbing the young inmate by his shirt. "You caused this, you little rat!" Marcus moved fast. He grabbed the attacker from behind and applied a sleeper hold, cutting off blood flow to the brain. The man struggled for 15 seconds, then went limp. Marcus lowered him to the floor, unconscious, but breathing. Torres recovered and charged again, this time with a piece of broken mop handle. Marcus sidestepped and caught his wrist, using a joint lock to force him to drop the weapon. Torres gasped in pain as Marcus applied pressure. "Stay down," Marcus warned, releasing him. But Torres was too angry to think clearly. He grabbed the sharpened plastic knife from the floor and came at Marcus in a wild rush. Marcus had no choice. He caught Torres's arm, twisted it behind his back, and forced him face first onto the wet concrete. The plastic knife skittered across the floor. "I said stay down." The fight was over in less than 3 minutes. All 3 attackers were disabled, but alive. Marcus had used just enough force to stop them without causing permanent damage. From a supply hallway, Luis Ortega watched through a cracked door. When the coast was clear, he crept into the laundry room and picked up the bloodied plastic knife. He turned it over in his hands and saw numbers stamped into the handle. M847, a maintenance inventory code. Luis slipped the weapon into his pocket, just as footsteps echoed in the hallway. Boone burst through the door with 3 guards, acting shocked at the scene. Torres and his men groaned on the floor, nursing injuries. Marcus stood near the washers, hands at his sides, breathing hard but calm. "What happened here?" Boone shouted. "They attacked me," Marcus said simply. "Attacked you? I see 3 injured inmates, and 1 troublemaker standing over them." Boone pulled out his radio. "This is Officer Boone requesting backup and medical to the laundry unit. We have an assault in progress." More guards flooded the room. They secured the injured gang members and placed Marcus in restraints without listening to his explanation. Darius tried to speak up. "Officer, he was just—" "Shut your mouth, Bell," Boone snapped. "Unless you want to join him in the hole." Darius fell silent, fear winning over honesty. Boone leaned close to Marcus as the guards prepared to escort him away. "Funny how trouble follows you everywhere, Reed. Almost like you're looking for it." Marcus met his stare. "I didn't start this." "Maybe not, but you sure finished it. And that makes you a threat to prison security." The guards dragged Marcus from the laundry room while Boone filled out an incident report, carefully documenting assault charges against the newest inmate at Blackwater Ridge. As they moved through the corridors, Marcus caught sight of Luis watching from a distance, the older man's face grim with understanding. By noon, Marcus was locked in solitary confinement, cut off from other inmates and unable to speak to anyone about what really happened in the laundry room that morning. Marcus sat on the narrow concrete bench in his solitary cell, staring at the scratched walls. The space was barely 6 feet by 8 feet, with a steel toilet, a sink that barely worked, and a slot in the door for food trays. The only light came from a dim bulb protected by thick wire mesh. But Marcus wasn't thinking about the cramped space or the stale air. He was listening to the pipes. Every prison had its own language. Water moving through old plumbing created patterns, tapping sounds, echoes that carried between cells if you knew how to read them. Marcus had learned to decode prison communications during his first week at Blackwater Ridge. 3 short taps. Pause. 2 long taps. Pause. 1 short tap. Luis was trying to reach him from somewhere in the general population. Marcus moved to the back corner of his cell and tapped a response on the exposed pipe near the floor. Short, short, long. The signal for listening. The reply came quickly. Luis tapped out a message in the simple code prisoners used when guards weren't paying attention. Each letter took time. Each word required patience. But the message was clear enough. Polk had records. Outside contact. Federal agent. Coming soon. Marcus tapped back. Who? Agent Voss. Marla Voss. Polk trusted her. The conversation ended when footsteps echoed in the corridor outside Marcus's cell. He moved away from the pipe and sat on his bench, hands folded, looking like a man spending quiet time in isolation. But his mind was racing. If Polk had contacted a federal agent, and if that agent was still planning to investigate Blackwater Ridge, there might be hope after all. 60 miles away from the prison, Naomi Reed sat in her Honda Civic in the courthouse parking lot, reading a letter for the third time. She had received it 2 days ago, forwarded from her old apartment address. The envelope was postmarked the day before Marcus entered Blackwater Ridge. The letter was short. Just 3 sentences written in Marcus's careful handwriting. Remember when Dad taught us to read trail signs in the woods? Some trails lead to dead ends. Others lead to clearings where the truth grows wild. Most people would think it was nonsense, but Naomi recognized the code immediately. When they were kids, Marcus had taught her military communication basics during their summer camping trips. Simple phrases that meant complex things. Dead ends meant danger. Clearings where truth grows wild meant evidence was hidden somewhere, waiting to be found. Marcus had expected trouble before he even set foot in prison. Naomi folded the letter and walked up the courthouse steps. She had spent 3 years as an investigative journalist before switching to freelance work. She still had contacts in legal offices. She still knew how to dig through public records when officials claimed documents didn't exist. The clerk at the records office was a tired woman named Patricia, who remembered Naomi from previous research visits. "I need to see court filings for People versus Marcus Reed," Naomi said. "Case number 2023 CR 4571. Patricia typed into her computer and frowned. "Most of that file is sealed. I can only give you basic information. What about evidence inventories? Witness lists? Pre-trial motions? Those are sealed too. Judge's orders." Naomi leaned across the counter. "Patricia, I've been coming here for 2 years. I've never seen a case this locked down. Even murder trials have more public information." Patricia glanced around to make sure they were alone. "Between you and me, this case was weird." Defense contractor executives were meeting with the prosecutor's office almost daily. They had their own attorney sitting in on plea negotiations. Which contractor? Meridian Defense Solutions, the same company your brother was supposedly selling secrets to. That name made Naomi's blood run cold. Meridian Defense Solutions was the contractor Marcus had exposed in his final military operation. The same company that had somehow managed to frame him for the very crimes he had been trying to stop. "Patricia, I need a favor. Can you check transfer records for Blackwater Ridge Penitentiary, specifically inmate movements over the past 6 months?" Patricia hesitated, then began typing. "This might take a few minutes." While Patricia searched, Naomi called a number she had found in her research notes. It belonged to Agent Marla Voss, a federal investigator who specialized in prison abuse cases. The phone rang twice before a professional voice answered. "Agent Voss. Agent Voss, my name is Naomi Reed. I'm calling about my brother Marcus Reed, currently incarcerated at Blackwater Ridge Penitentiary." "Ms. Reed, I can't discuss ongoing investigations." "So, there is an investigation." A pause. "I was contacted by an inmate at that facility several weeks ago, a man named Raymond Polk. He claimed to have evidence of illegal labor transfers and staged deaths. I was scheduled to interview him this week." Naomi's heart pounded. "Agent Voss, Raymond Polk is dead. My brother found his body, and now Marcus is in solitary confinement for defending himself against prison gang attacks." Another pause, longer this time. "Ms. Reed, I think we need to meet." Patricia waved Naomi over to the counter. She had printed several pages of transfer records showing unusual patterns in inmate movements, from Blackwater Ridge to various work camps. "Look at this," Patricia whispered. "Inmates transferred to restricted facilities, but no return dates listed. And look at the authorization signatures." Naomi scanned the documents. Every transfer was signed by Warden Douglas Shaw and approved by Meridian Defense Solution as the contracted labor provider. The same company that had destroyed Marcus's life was running illegal operations inside the prison, where he was now trapped. Naomi gathered the papers and thanked Patricia. As she walked toward the parking lot, she noticed a black SUV with tinted windows parked near the courthouse entrance. The engine was running, but no one got out. She climbed into her Honda and started the engine. The SUV pulled out behind her as she left the parking lot, maintaining a careful distance but clearly following her route back toward the highway. Naomi gripped the steering wheel tighter and pressed the accelerator. Someone was watching her now, which meant she was getting close to something they wanted to keep hidden. The solitary cell door clanged open after 48 hours of darkness. Marcus blinked against the harsh fluorescent light as Officer Boone stood in the doorway with 2 guards flanking him. "Time for work details, soldier boy," Boone sneered. "Hope you enjoyed your vacation." Marcus said nothing. He had learned that silence frustrated Boone more than any response. The officer's jaw tightened as he stepped aside. "Move." Marcus walked into the corridor where other inmates waited in a single line. Darius stood near the front, his young face pale and nervous. The kid avoided eye contact but nodded slightly when he saw Marcus. Behind him stood 6 other men, all looking scared or defeated. "Hands behind your backs," Boone ordered. The guards zip-tied their wrists with plastic restraints. Not the usual procedure for work detail inside the prison. Marcus's military training kicked in, cataloging every detail. The guards carried batons and radios, but also carried sidearms. That never happened during regular prison operations. "Where are we going?" asked an older inmate with graying hair. Boone slammed his baton against the wall inches from the man's head. "Did anyone tell you to speak?" The inmate flinched and went quiet. Boone led them down a corridor Marcus had never seen before. Instead of heading toward the main work areas, they descended a staircase that led beneath the prison. The walls changed from painted concrete to rough stone. Emergency lighting cast long shadows between support beams. "This part of the prison was built during World War II, Boone said, his voice echoing in the narrow space. "Back when they knew how to handle troublemakers." The underground tunnel stretched for what felt like half a mile. Marcus counted his steps and memorized every turn. At the end, they reached a heavy steel door marked with warning signs about authorized personnel only. Boone punched in a code on an electronic lock. The door opened with a hydraulic hiss. What Marcus saw beyond that door made his blood run cold. The restricted labor wing looked nothing like a prison work program. It was a factory. Industrial machines hummed under bright work lights, while inmates in dirty uniforms assembled metal components at long tables. Armed guards in tactical gear patrolled between the workstations, carrying assault rifles instead of batons. This was not corrections. This was forced labor under military supervision. Marcus scanned the operation with trained eyes. The inmates worked on electronic parts, weapons components, and communications equipment. Many showed signs of injury or exhaustion. Some had medical tags hanging from their necks, but the tags looked wrong. Too new. Too clean. "Welcome to the real Blackwater Ridge," Boone said quietly. "This is where inmates learn the value of keeping their mouths shut." A supervisor in military fatigues approached their group. He wore no name tag or rank insignia, but his bearing screamed special operations. The man looked over the new arrivals like he was inspecting livestock. "These the ones Shaw sent down?" "Reed's the priority," Boone replied. The rest are just numbers. The supervisor nodded and pointed toward an empty workstation. Reed works assembly line 3. The kid goes to packaging. Split up the others. As they walked deeper into the factory, Marcus noticed wooden shipping crates stacked against the far wall. Each crate bore stenciled numbers and destination codes. His heart nearly stopped when he recognized a familiar marking system. The crates used the same numbering sequence as the illegal weapons shipments he had discovered during his final Delta Force mission in Afghanistan. The same supply chain that had led to his investigation of Meridian Defense Solutions. The same evidence that had gotten him framed and sent to prison. Shaw's prison was not just hiding corruption. It was part of the military contractor's ongoing operation. The inmates were being used as forced labor to produce components for the same illegal weapons network Marcus had tried to expose. Raymond Polk had died because he discovered this connection. The same connection that could prove Marcus's innocence and bring down everyone involved. Marcus memorized every detail as they approached the assembly line. Injured inmates worked in silence, too frightened to look up from their tasks. Medical charts hung on clipboards, but the handwriting looked forged. Men who should have been in the infirmary were forced to work through obvious pain. One shipping label had fallen near the workstation where they stopped. Marcus bent down, as if adjusting his shoe, and palmed the label, sliding it into his sock. The paper felt like evidence, like hope. Boone grabbed Marcus's shoulder and spun him around. His eyes were cold and dangerous. "Let me make something real clear, Reed. Men who ask questions down here leave in body bags. Men who cause trouble disappear permanently. And men who think they can play hero?" Boone leaned closer, his breath hot against Marcus's ear. "They wish they had died in that yard on day 1. Marcus stumbled back into cell block C as the evening count began. His muscles ached from 8 hours of forced labor in the hidden factory. But the shipping label pressed against his ankle felt like a lifeline. The paper proved everything. The connection between Shaw's operation and Meridian Defense Solution, the same contractor that had framed him. He needed to get the evidence to Luis without Boone's guards seeing him pass it. The showers emptied quickly after dinner. Most inmates avoided the communal washing area during evening hours when guards grew careless and violence erupted without witnesses. Marcus waited until the last man left before stepping under the lukewarm spray, letting the water wash away the factory's chemical smell. Heavy footsteps echoed against wet tile. Marcus turned slowly, water dripping from his face, and found Victor Hale standing in the doorway. The gang leader's nose sat crooked from their yard fight, purple bruising still visible under his eyes. But the bravado was gone. In its place burned something more dangerous, pure humiliation. "Just you and me this time, Reed." Marcus shut off the water and grabbed his towel. "Walk away, Hale." "Can't do that." Hale stepped closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "You made me look weak in front of the whole yard. Now every punk thinks they can challenge me. My own crew questions my orders. That's not my problem." Hale's fists clenched. "Shaw made me an offer. I deliver your head, and I get control of Cell Block C. All the protection rackets, all the commissary cuts. Everything." Marcus wrapped the towel around his waist and faced Hale directly. "Shaw's lying to you. You don't know nothing about. Shaw plans to eliminate you the second you stop being useful." Marcus's voice stayed calm, but his eyes never left Hale's hands. "Just like he eliminated Raymond Polk. Just like he'll eliminate every witness when this operation goes public." Hale laughed, but the sound felt forced. "You're crazy, man. Shaw needs muscle like mine to keep this place running." Marcus pulled the shipping label from his boot and held it up. The paper looked small and harmless, but Hale's expression changed when he saw the Meridian Defense logo. "You know what this is, Hale?" Proof that Shaw's running illegal weapons manufacturing using prison labor. The same operation that got me framed. The same network that has enough money and power to make entire prisons disappear if they need to. Hale stared at the label. That don't mean nothing to me. It means Shaw uses gangs as disposable muscle. When federal investigators get too close, gangs take the blame. Gang leaders get transferred to maximum security or found dead from overdoses. Shaw keeps his hands clean. You're lying. Am I? Marcus stepped closer. How many of your lieutenants have been transferred in the past year? How many rivals suddenly got moved to other blocks right before they could cause Shaw problems? Hale's jaw tightened, but he did not answer. That night, Marcus lay on his bunk, listening to the familiar sounds of Cell Block C settling into darkness. Footsteps echoed from the corridor as guards conducted their final rounds. Someone coughed 3 cells down. Water dripped from a leaky pipe in the wall. Then came the sound Marcus had been expecting. Heavy boots stopping outside a cell, keys rattling, and a low voice giving orders. Transfer time, Rodriguez. Pack your things. Marcus heard Tommy Rodriguez, Hale's closest lieutenant, protesting in rapid Spanish. Rodriguez had been questioning Boone's orders all week, asking why certain inmates got special work assignments while others disappeared. I ain't done nothing wrong, man. My transfer don't come up for 6 months. Change of plans, Boone's voice replied coldly. You're moving tonight. The cell door slammed shut. Footsteps faded down the corridor. Rodriguez's voice disappeared with them. Marcus closed his eyes and counted to 60 before sitting up. 3 tiers above, Victor Hale stood gripping his cell bars, staring down at the empty corridor where his lieutenant had been taken. Their eyes met across the darkness. Hale's face showed no emotion, but Marcus saw the recognition there. The pattern Shaw had denied was happening right in front of them. Hale finally saw the truth Marcus had been trying to explain. From the tier above them both, Officer Boone watched through the shadows as Marcus and Hale exchanged that long, silent look. He pulled out his radio and pressed the transmit button. Warden Shaw, we got a problem. The chapel at Blackwater Ridge had not seen this many inmates in years. Luis Ortega sat in the front pew, his weathered hands folded over a worn Bible. Behind him, Marcus entered through the side door, followed by Victor Hale and 2 men who had never spoken to each other without violence. Damon Cross ran Cell Block A with quiet efficiency. He was thin, sharp-eyed, and careful about every word he spoke. Jerome Williams controlled Block B through respect rather than fear. Both men had lost lieutenants to Shaw's mysterious transfers. This better be worth the risk, Reed, Cross muttered, glancing toward the chapel door. If Boone finds us meeting like this, Boone's the least of our problems, Marcus replied, settling onto the wooden bench. The chapel felt cold, despite the afternoon heat pressing against the barred windows. Dust floated in shafts of sunlight that cut through the stale air. Hale shifted uncomfortably beside the other gang leaders. Tell them what you told me. About the shipping labels. Marcus pulled the crumpled paper from his boot and spread it flat on the pew between them. The Meridian Defense logo stared up at them like an accusation. Shaw's running forced labor for a defense contractor called Meridian. They produce illegal weapons parts using prison workers who can't report safety violations or demand fair wages. When inmates figure out what's happening, they disappear. Jerome leaned forward, studying the label. You're saying Shaw kills people for a company? I'm saying Shaw protects a company that's worth millions to people outside these walls. Raymond Polk discovered the connection before he died. That's why they wanted me dead the second I walked through those gates. Cross traced the shipping code with his finger. How do we know this ain't some setup? Maybe you're working with Shaw to divide us up. Because Rodriguez got transferred last night, Hale said quietly. just like Reed said would happen. My own lieutenant, gone because he asked too many questions. The chapel fell silent except for the distant sound of voices echoing from the main yard. Marcus watched the three gang leaders process what they had heard. These men controlled hundreds of inmates across the prison. Their cooperation could expose everything Shaw had built. "What do you want from us?" Jerome asked finally. "Evidence, documents, shipping records, anything that proves the connection between Shaw, Boone, and Meridian Defense. Luis still has contacts on the outside who can verify financial records, if we get them proof." Luis nodded from the front pew. "I worked as an accountant before my conviction. I know how to trace money through corporate shells and fake accounts. But I need hard evidence to work with." "The kitchen carts move supplies between all the cell blocks," Cross said slowly. "We could hide copies of documents in food deliveries, pass information without guards seeing it happen." "It's risky," Jerome warned. "If Shaw catches us cooperating instead of fighting each other, he'll know something changed." Marcus stood and walked to the chapel window. Through the reinforced glass, he could see inmates moving across the yard in their usual patterns. Guards watched from towers, believing they controlled everything happening below. "Shaw's power depends on keeping us divided," Marcus said. "Every gang war, every extortion payment, every inmate too scared to speak up. That's how he stays protected." Hale stood as well, his massive frame casting shadows across the wooden pews. "What if we stop playing his game?" "You mean stop the extortion?" Cross asked, surprised. "I mean stop everything. No more payments. No more territory fights. No more doing Shaw's dirty work for free." Jerome shook his head. "My men won't understand why we're backing down from collecting what inmates owe us." "Then explain it to them," Marcus replied. "Tell them the truth. Shaw's been using gang violence to keep federal investigators away. Every fight we start gives him cover for the real crimes happening in that restricted wing." Luis turned in his pew to face them. "Gentlemen, I've seen the financial reports Shaw files with the state. This prison should be losing money every month based on operational costs. Instead, it shows consistent profits. That money is coming from somewhere Shaw doesn't want audited." Cross and Jerome exchanged glances. Both men had run numbers for years, understanding profit margins and territorial control. Luis's explanation made sense in ways that felt dangerous. "So, we gather evidence," Cross said finally. "Use kitchen deliveries to pass documents between blocks. Luis analyzes whatever financial records we can find. But what happens when Shaw realizes his extortion money stopped coming in?" "We deal with that when it happens," Hale replied. "Right now, Rodriguez is gone. Next week, it might be one of your lieutenants. Eventually, Shaw eliminates all of us." Marcus returned to the pew and looked at each man directly. "My sister is investigating this case from the outside. She's arranged for a federal agent to inspect Blackwater Ridge within 24 hours. If we can get evidence to that agent, this ends." "What kind of evidence?" Jerome asked. "Shipping manifests, financial transfers, work schedules from the restricted wing. Anything that proves inmates are being used as illegal labor." Luis reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook filled with cramped handwriting. "I've been documenting unusual transfers and deaths for 2 years. Names, dates, circumstances. If you can provide documentation that matches my observations, we can build a case," Marcus finished. The three gang leaders sat in silence, weighing risks against potential freedom. Outside the chapel, footsteps echoed in the corridor as a guard walked past without stopping. Cross spoke first. "Block A will cooperate. We'll start gathering documents tonight." Jerome nodded slowly. "Block B is in. But if this backfires, Reed, we're all dead men." Hale stood and extended his hand toward Marcus. "Block C supports the plan." Marcus shook Hale's hand, then Cross's, then Jerome's. The alliance felt fragile but real. For the first time since entering Blackwater Ridge, Marcus believed they might actually expose Shaw's operation. "Meeting's over," Luis whispered, hearing footsteps approaching the chapel door. "We never spoke." Outside Blackwater Ridge, Naomi Reed sat in a shabby motel room across from Agent Marla Voss. The federal investigator was younger than Naomi expected, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that reminded her of Marcus. "These court records show clear irregularities," Voss said, reviewing the documents Naomi had copied. "Evidence was sealed without proper justification. Witness testimony was excluded on technicalities. Your brother's conviction looks increasingly questionable." Naomi leaned forward eagerly. "Can you get him released? First, I need to inspect the prison itself. The connection you've discovered between Marcus's case and Blackwater Ridge suggests a much larger conspiracy. If Shaw is running illegal operations, federal inspection could expose everything. When can you visit the prison?" Voss checked her watch. "Tomorrow morning. I have legal authority to conduct unannounced inspections of federal contractor facilities. Shaw won't be able to refuse access." For the first time in months, Naomi felt hope spreading through her chest. Her brother had been fighting alone inside those walls, but now he would have federal support. "Agent Voss, Marcus is in serious danger inside that prison. Shaw and his guards have been targeting him since the day he arrived." "I understand. That's why I'm moving quickly. Within 24 hours, we'll either have evidence to shut down Shaw's operation, or we'll have grounds to transfer Marcus to federal protection." Naomi shook the agent's hand, feeling tears of relief threatening to spill. "Thank you. Marcus gave up everything to protect the soldiers under his command. He deserves someone fighting for him." "He'll get it," Voss promised, gathering the court records into her briefcase. "Shaw has no idea what's coming." Inside Blackwater Ridge, word spread quickly through the cell blocks. Hale's extortion collectors returned empty-handed for the first time in years. Inmates who normally paid protection money instead kept their commissary funds and waited to see what would happen. Cross's men distributed copies of shipping labels hidden inside bread rolls. Jerome's block leaders photographed work schedules using smuggled phone cameras. Luis received dozens of small papers through kitchen deliveries, each containing fragments of Shaw's operation. Shaw noticed the change immediately. His afternoon reports showed a dramatic drop in incident reports, gang fights, and disciplinary actions. Instead of celebrating the peace, Shaw grew visibly agitated. "Something's wrong," he told Boone during their evening meeting. "The inmates are too quiet. Cooperation like this doesn't happen naturally." "You think Reed's organizing them?" Boone asked. "I think Reed's more dangerous than we assumed. Military training, leadership experience, and now he's got gang leaders listening to him instead of fighting each other." Shaw walked to his office window overlooking the main yard. Below, inmates moved in calm, organized patterns rather than the chaotic tension that normally defined prison life. "Double Marcus Reed's security detail," Shaw ordered, "and prepare transfer paperwork for Hale, Cross, and Williams. If they're cooperating with Reed, they all need to disappear." But that night, as Shaw finished signing the transfer orders, every television in Blackwater Ridge flickered to the evening news broadcast. The reporter's voice carried clearly through the cell blocks, the guard stations, and Shaw's administrative office. Federal investigator Agent Marla Voss was killed tonight in what police are calling a suspicious single-car accident on Highway 94. Agent Voss was reportedly investigating corruption allegations at several federal contractor facilities. Shaw felt relief flooding through him until the reporter continued speaking. "Police have issued a warrant for Marcus Reed, an inmate at Blackwater Ridge Penitentiary, in connection with Agent Voss's death. Reed allegedly made threats against federal investigators before his recent imprisonment. Marcus stood frozen in his cell, gripping the bars as the news report destroyed everything they had built. The alliance, the evidence, the hope of federal inspection, all of it collapsed in 30 seconds of fabricated television news. Shaw's voice echoed through the prison intercom system moments later. Inmate Reed, report to administrative holding immediately. You're being charged with conspiracy to commit murder. The steel doors of cell block C exploded open at 4:30 in the morning. Emergency lights bathed the tier in harsh red as Boone's voice boomed through the intercom. Full lockdown. Every inmate face down on your bunks. Anyone moves gets the stick. 20 guards in riot gear poured through the corridors. They carried batons, zip ties, and the kind of rage that comes from watching their control slip away. Boone led them personally, his face twisted with satisfaction. Agent Voss is dead because you animals thought you could play games with federal investigators, Boone shouted, as guards began tearing apart cells. Reed's little revolution just became a murder conspiracy. Marcus pressed against his cell door, watching chaos erupt across the block. Guards ripped mattresses apart, scattered belongings, and destroyed anything that looked like contraband. Inmates who protested received baton strikes to their ribs and backs. 3 cells down, Luis Ortega tried to shield his hidden ledgers as guards flipped his bunk. The elderly accountant had sewn financial records into his mattress lining, over months of careful documentation. Boone spotted the papers immediately. Well, well, what do we have here? Boone grabbed Luis by his gray hair and dragged him into the corridor. Looks like our bookkeeper's been keeping the wrong kind of books. Those are just personal letters, Luis gasped, his voice weak from being yanked from sleep. Boone backhanded him across the face. Blood splattered from Luis's split lip onto the concrete floor. Personal letters with shipping codes and transfer dates? Boone held up pages of Luis's careful handwriting. Personal letters with Shaw's signature forged at the bottom? The beating began immediately. Boone's baton connected with Luis's shoulder, then his stomach. The older man collapsed, gasping for air while guards held his arms. "Stop!" Marcus shouted from his cell. "He's just an old man." "An old man who's been smuggling evidence for your little resistance movement," Boone snarled. He kicked Luis in the ribs. "How many copies did you make, Grandpa? How many places did you hide Shaw's business records?" Luis coughed blood, but refused to answer. Boone raised his baton again. Marcus gripped his cell bars until his knuckles went white. Every instinct screamed at him to break through the steel and stop the assault. But trapped behind locked doors, he could only watch Luis suffer for trying to help. The beating continued for 3 minutes. When it ended, Luis lay unconscious in a pool of blood, while Boone collected the scattered ledger pages. "Take him to the infirmary," Boone ordered 2 guards. "Make sure the paperwork says he fell down the stairs." Marcus was dragged from his cell 20 minutes later, cuffed behind his back, while guards destroyed the remaining evidence in his Bible. They marched him through corridors filled with broken furniture and beaten inmates. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you?" Boone shoved Marcus toward the administrative wing. "Agent Voss died because you filled her head with lies about corruption. Her blood's on your hands." "I never met Agent Voss," Marcus said quietly. "Tell that to the federal prosecutors who'll be charging you with conspiracy to commit murder." Boone's smile was vicious. "Shaw's got phone records showing you contacted outside investigators. Video footage of you organizing gang resistance. Witness statements from inmates saying you planned violence." They reached the solitary confinement wing beneath the prison. The same metal door, the same concrete cell, the same suffocating darkness Marcus had endured before. "Enjoy your last night at Blackwater Ridge," Boone said as guards shoved Marcus inside. "Tomorrow morning you're getting transferred to ADX Florence, Supermax Security. 23 hours a day in isolation for the rest of your worthless life." The door slammed shut with finality that echoed through the corridor. Meanwhile, 90 miles away, Naomi Reed woke to the sound of splintering wood. Her motel room door hung off its hinges while 3 men in dark suits ransacked her belongings. She rolled silently off the bed and crawled toward the bathroom, clutching the backup files she kept sewn into her coat lining. The bathroom window opened onto an alley behind the building. Naomi squeezed through the narrow opening and dropped onto broken asphalt, just as she heard voices from her room. Nothing here but newspaper clippings and court records. Boss wants every piece of paper that mentions Blackwater Ridge, or the contractor. Naomi crept along the alley wall, her heart hammering as she reached the street. Her car keys were inside with the intruders, but the bus station sat 6 blocks away. She started running. Back in solitary confinement, Marcus sat in complete darkness, listening to the sounds of the prison settling around him. The lockdown had ended, but an eerie silence filled the corridors above. Shaw's voice echoed through the intercom system. Due to recent security threats and the death of a federal investigator, Blackwater Ridge is implementing enhanced isolation protocols. Inmate Reed will be transferred to ADX Florence at 0600 hours tomorrow for the safety of staff and other inmates. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to think. Every ally beaten or scattered. Every piece of evidence destroyed or confiscated. Naomi probably dead or running for her life. Shaw had won. But as Marcus sat in the darkness, he noticed something. The ventilation grate near the ceiling carried more than just stale air. Voices drifted through the metal slats from the maintenance corridor that ran behind the solitary cells. Marcus moved closer to listen. A familiar voice whispered through the darkness. Shaw betrayed me too. Tell me what you need. Victor Hale's voice carried through the ventilation system like a lifeline thrown into drowning water. Marcus pressed his ear against the ventilation grate, listening to Victor Hale's whispered voice carry through the metal corridors beneath Blackwater Ridge. Shaw promised me control of Block C if you died, Hale said through the darkness. Yesterday he had my Lieutenant Torres dragged out for asking too many questions. Found out this morning Torres ain't coming back. Marcus tapped 3 times against the wall. A pause, then 2 taps. The same code he'd used during covert operations when radio silence was critical. Hale caught on quickly. You want me to listen? 1 tap for yes. Shaw's moving you out at dawn. Guards are already prepping the transport van. But I got 40 men who ain't happy about being used as disposable muscle. Marcus began a series of careful knocks against the concrete. Short taps and long ones, spelling out instructions Hale could relay to the others. 20 minutes later, Hale's voice returned through the vent. Darius is alive. Kid's working food service tomorrow. Says he can carry messages in the bread trays. Marcus knocked out new instructions. Specific timing. Guard rotations. Which cameras had blind spots during evening count. Above them, the lockdown continued with mechanical precision. Guards marched inmates back to cells in single file. No talking, no eye contact, no deviation from the routes Shaw had ordered. But beneath the surface, Marcus's network began to move. Darius pushed the food cart through Block C, dropping torn napkins with pencil markings near specific cells. Each message contained part of Marcus's plan, written in simple codes the inmates could understand. In the infirmary, Luis lay on a narrow bed with 3 broken ribs and a concussion that made the room spin when he moved. A young nurse named Sarah checked his bandages and whispered that someone outside had been asking about computer access. Tell her, Luis managed through swollen lips. The prison's external server connects through the maintenance office, Building 7. Back entrance stays unlocked during shift changes. Sarah nodded and slipped the information into her pocket. 90 miles away, Naomi sat at a library computer terminal, uploading the stolen documents to secure servers while rain pounded against the windows. 3 newsrooms had already confirmed receipt. But she knew Shaw's people could discredit paperwork as forgeries. She needed live footage, real-time proof of what happened inside Blackwater Ridge. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Sarah the nurse, following Luis's instructions. Building 7, back door, 8 p.m. shift change, server room basement. Naomi checked the time. 6:30. She could make it if she drove hard and avoided the main roads. Back in solitary, Marcus continued directing his improvised army through taps and whispered voices in the vents. Hale's men would create distractions during evening count. Darius would position himself near the chapel. Most importantly, someone needed to reach the projector room that connected to every monitor in the prison. Chapel's got cameras and speakers that tie into the main system, Hale confirmed through the darkness. Guards don't usually check it during count, because inmates ain't supposed to be there. Marcus knocked out the final sequence. Everything depended on timing and the guards following their predictable routines. The plan was desperate and dangerous, but it was the only chance they had. At 7:50 p.m., evening count began throughout Blackwater Ridge. Guards moved from cell to cell, checking names against clipboards while inmates stood at attention. In the administration wing, Warden Shaw reviewed Marcus's transfer paperwork one final time. Everything looked legitimate. Medical emergency requiring immediate transport to the federal facility's hospital wing. Of course, Marcus would never arrive at any hospital. Shaw picked up his radio and called Officer Boone. Time to move our problem. Medical emergency in solitary. Have the transport team ready. The solitary cell door clanged open at 8:03 p.m. Boone stood silhouetted against the dim corridor light, flanked by 3 guards in tactical gear. Each man carried batons, pepper spray, and sidearms they weren't supposed to use inside the prison. But tonight was different. Tonight, they had permission. Medical emergency, Reed, Boone announced with a cold smile. You're being transferred for immediate treatment. Marcus sat on the concrete bench, hands resting calmly on his knees. He'd been listening to footsteps in the corridor for the past 10 minutes. 3 sets of boots. Heavy tactical gear. No medical personnel. Where's the stretcher? Marcus asked quietly. Boone's smile widened. You won't need one where you're going. The first guard stepped into the narrow cell doorway, reaching for his restraints. Marcus had been waiting for that exact moment. The doorway was barely wide enough for one person, forcing them to come at him single file instead of surrounding him. Marcus exploded forward, driving his shoulder into the guard's midsection before the man could draw his weapon. The impact slammed the guard backward into Boone, creating a tangle of bodies in the cramped corridor. Marcus grabbed the loose ankle chain from his cell floor, a length of heavy steel they'd forgotten to secure, and whipped it across the second guard's wrist as he raised his baton. The man screamed and dropped his weapon. At that exact moment, chaos erupted throughout Blackwater Ridge. In the laundry room, Hale's men overturned industrial washing machines, sending scalding water flooding across the floor, not attacking the regular staff, but targeting the 3 corrupt officers who controlled the restricted labor assignments. They barricaded the supervisors inside a supply closet, while steam filled the room and triggered fire alarms. In the kitchen, inmates loyal to Luis surrounded the 2 guards who'd beaten him in his cell. They didn't touch them, just formed a tight circle, chanting Luis's name while pots and pans clattered to the floor. The noise echoed through the entire building. In the chapel, Darius slipped through the side door while guards responded to the other disturbances. He found the projector room unlocked, just as Marcus had predicted. Rows of switches and monitors connected to every security camera in the prison. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Luis struggled to sit up despite his broken ribs. Sarah the nurse held her cell phone to his ear while he guided someone on the other end. Building 7, basement level, Luis whispered. 3rd server rack from the wall. Password is Blackwater, followed by Shaw's badge number. 4471. 90 miles away, Naomi crouched beside humming computer equipment in the maintenance building basement. Her laptop connected to the prison's external network while rain hammered the roof above. "I'm in," she told Luis through the phone. "What am I looking for?" "Financial transfers, inmate work assignments." Medical reports marked deceased. Security monitors throughout Blackwater Ridge began flickering as Naomi accessed the system remotely. Guards in the control tower started shouting about network malfunctions. Back in the corridor outside Solitary, Boone kicked the injured guard aside and charged at Marcus with his baton raised high. Marcus sidestepped and used Boone's momentum to drive him face first into the concrete wall. "You picked the wrong night to play executioner," Marcus said. Boone spun around, blood streaming from his nose, swinging the baton wildly. Marcus ducked and grabbed a metal folding chair from the corridor. He blocked Boone's next strike, the impact ringing through the hallway like a bell. The third guard finally found his footing and reached for his radio to call for backup. Marcus threw the ankle chain, catching the man across the throat and sending him crashing into the wall. Boone's eyes went wide with panic as he realized his backup plan was falling apart. Alarms blared from multiple sections of the prison. His radio crackled with confused reports about coordinated disturbances. "This isn't over," Boone snarled, backing toward the workshop at the end of the corridor. Marcus followed, his movements calm and controlled, despite the chaos around them. "Actually, it is." Boone slammed through the workshop door, grabbing tools and metal pipes from the workbenches. The room was filled with industrial equipment, welding stations, and heavy tables that could be weapons or shields. Marcus entered slowly, watching Boone's desperate movements. The corrupt officer was cornered, and desperate men made dangerous mistakes. Boone swung a pipe wrench at Marcus's head. Marcus ducked and drove an uppercut into Boone's ribs, hearing something crack. The officer stumbled backward, knocking over a welding cart. "Shaw's going down tonight," Marcus said, advancing steadily. "You can go down with him, or you can start talking." Boone raised his baton with his left hand, his right arm hanging useless at his side. Sweat poured down his face as he realized the tables had completely turned. Marcus grabbed a metal table edge and flipped it onto its side, creating a barrier. Then he vaulted over it and tackled Boone to the floor, pinning the officer's working arm beneath his knee. "Raymond Polk," Marcus said, applying pressure. "Tell me who ordered his death." Boone's voice cracked as Marcus applied more pressure to his pinned arm. "Shaw! It was Shaw who ordered it." The words echoed through the workshop just as every monitor in Blackwater Ridge flickered to life. Boone's confession played across screens in the control tower, the mess hall, and every cell block. Inmates pressed against their cell doors, watching in stunned silence. Honest guards froze at their posts, finally hearing what they had suspected for years. "Say it again," Marcus demanded, knowing Naomi's connection was broadcasting everything live. "Warden Shaw ordered Raymond Polk's death," Boone screamed, his face twisted in pain and desperation. "Polk was going to testify about the labor contracts. Shaw told me to make it look like suicide." The monitors switched to new footage as Naomi's uploaded files began playing automatically. Transfer logs scrolled across screens showing inmates disappearing from official records. Hidden work contracts revealed payments from Meridian Defense Solutions, the same contractor from Marcus's case. Then came the most damning evidence: security footage of Polk being dragged from his cell by 3 guards, very much alive, hours before his body was found hanging. In the control tower, the duty supervisor grabbed his radio with shaking hands. "We need federal assistance immediately. We have a situation." Shaw burst into the control room, his face pale as he watched his empire crumble in real time. "Cut the feeds! Now!" "I can't, sir. The system's been compromised from outside." Shaw's hands trembled as he realized the scope of the exposure. Every dirty transaction, every staged death, every illegal shipment was being broadcast beyond the prison walls. His phone buzzed with frantic calls from Meridian executives. Marcus released Boone and stood up, leaving the broken officer on the workshop floor. Through the windows, he could see federal vehicles approaching the prison gates, their emergency lights cutting through the darkness. Shaw abandoned the control tower and ran toward the administration wing. He knew about the old utility tunnel that connected to the restricted work area, the same passage used to move illegal shipments without detection. If he could reach the external exit, he might escape before the feds locked down the entire facility. Marcus left the workshop and found Hale waiting in the corridor with Darius. The young inmate's eyes were wide with disbelief as he watched Shaw's crimes play out on nearby monitors. "He's running," Hale said, pointing toward the stairwell leading to the lower levels. The three men descended into the maintenance corridors beneath Blackwater Ridge. The air grew colder and damper as they moved deeper underground. Emergency lighting cast long shadows on concrete walls stained with years of neglect. They reached the restricted wings storage area, where Marcus saw dozens of shipping crates marked with Meridian's contractor codes, the same symbols he had photographed during his final Delta Force mission. The evidence of Shaw's operations surrounded them like a monument to corruption. Shaw's footsteps echoed from the tunnel ahead. He was moving fast, but not fast enough. "There!" Darius pointed to a steel door marked "Emergency Exit Only." Shaw was fumbling with a keycard at the tunnel exit when Hale's massive frame filled the doorway behind him. The warden spun around, his face desperate and wild. "Victor, listen to me!" Shaw gasped, backing against the steel door. "I can make you rich. Real money, not prison scraps. Help me get out of here, and you'll never want for anything again." Hale stepped closer, his scarred knuckles flexing. For years, Shaw had used him as disposable muscle, promising power that never came. Now the warden offered wealth with the same lying tongue. "You used me," Hale said quietly. "Made me hurt people for your profit. I gave you respect. I gave you control. You gave me nothing but blood on my hands." The sound of federal agents echoing through the tunnel grew louder. Shaw's eyes darted between Hale and the locked door behind him. "Please, Victor. We can both walk away from this." Hale lunged forward and tackled Shaw to the concrete floor, just as federal agents burst through the steel doors with weapons drawn. Morning light crept through the razor wire as federal agents swarmed Blackwater Ridge. The prison that had operated in shadow for years now faced the harsh glare of accountability. Black SUVs lined the parking lot, while agents in bulletproof vests moved through every corridor, securing evidence and rounding up corrupt staff. Officer Travis Boone stumbled out of the main building with his broken arm secured in a sling. His face was swollen from the workshop fight, but his mouth still ran with the same venom that had terrorized inmates for years. "This is garbage," he screamed at the federal agents escorting him. "You got no idea what these animals are like. Reed started every bit of this violence." Agent Sarah Mitchell, the lead federal investigator, barely glanced at him as she secured his handcuffs to the transport van. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, assault under color of authority, and accessory to murder. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." Boone's threats echoed across the yard, but for the first time in years, no one flinched. Inmates pressed against cell windows, watching their tormentor dragged away like any common criminal. The man who had wielded absolute power over their lives now looked small and pathetic in federal custody. Warden Douglas Shaw emerged next, flanked by 4 agents. His expensive suit was rumpled and torn from the tunnel struggle. The same yard where he had orchestrated Marcus's first-day ambush now served as his stage of humiliation. News cameras captured every step as he was marched past the recreation area where 11 gang members had once surrounded a single man. Shaw kept his head down, but inmates called out from behind the fence. "How's it feel, Warden?" "Justice coming for you, too. Remember us when you get to your new cell." Shaw's empire of fear crumbled with each footstep toward the transport vehicle. In the prison infirmary, Luis Ortega lay connected to monitors and IV tubes, his face still bearing the marks of Boone's brutal beating. Federal agents gathered around his bed with recording equipment as he gave testimony that would destroy Shaw's network completely. Polk had everything documented, Luis whispered, his voice hoarse but determined. Transfer logs, payment records, even recordings of Shaw's meetings with the contractor representatives. He hid copies in 3 different locations before they killed him. Agent Mitchell leaned closer. "Can you help us find those locations?" Luis nodded weakly. "Polk trusted me because I understood the numbers." Shaw was moving millions through fake prison accounts. The restricted wing wasn't just forced labor. It was a full manufacturing operation using inmate slavery. Outside the prison, Naomi Reed stood before a cluster of news vans, her laptop open as she coordinated with editors across the country. Her investigation had sparked a federal probe that reached far beyond Blackwater Ridge's walls. The Meridian Defense Solutions has been using prison labor to fulfill military contracts for over 5 years, she reported into the cameras. Inmates were forced to work 18-hour shifts, producing equipment for overseas operations, while the company collected full payment for manufactured goods. The story exploded across national headlines within hours. Congressional hearings were announced. Stock prices collapsed. Executive arrests followed in multiple states. 3 weeks later, Marcus Reed stood in a federal courthouse as Judge Patricia Vance read the decision that cleared his name. After reviewing new evidence presented by federal investigators, this court finds that Marcus Reed's original conviction was obtained through prosecutorial misconduct and suppressed evidence. All charges are hereby dismissed with prejudice. The gavel struck with the sound of vindication. Marcus returned to Blackwater Ridge one final time, but not in shackles. He walked through the same intake corridor where Boone had once marched him toward certain death. Now he came to collect his few belongings and close this chapter of his life. The new warden, a reform-minded woman named Director Helen Cruz, personally escorted him through the facility. The corrupt guards were gone. The illegal operations had been shut down. Inmates moved through their routines with dignity instead of fear. "Your actions saved lives," Director Cruz told him as they walked past the workshop where he had fought Boone. 17 inmates who disappeared under Shaw's administration have been located at illegal work sites. They're getting medical care and legal representation. Marcus nodded, but remained quiet. Justice felt right, but it couldn't erase the suffering that had occurred within these walls. He collected his property, a few letters from Naomi, his military dog tags, and the small Bible where he had hidden Raymond Polk's evidence. Everything else about his old life had been taken from him long before he entered this place. As Marcus approached the main gate, inmates gathered along the exercise yard fence. They didn't cheer or call out. They simply watched in respectful silence as the man who had taught them to fight back walked toward freedom. Victor Hale stood among them, his massive frame visible through the chain link. The gang leader who had once tried to break Marcus now understood what real strength looked like. He raised one scarred hand in acknowledgement. Marcus paused at the gate and looked back once at the faces pressed against the fence. Men who had learned they didn't have to accept brutality. Men who had discovered their voices mattered. Then he stepped through the gate where Naomi waited beside her car, tears streaming down her face. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.